anthropology and education. He's the author of 3 books. Most of his published work is on Heidegger, as you will see. The first one is Heidegger, Metaphysics and the University of Being, published with Continuum in 2010. He's also published Phenomenology Between Aesthetics and Idealism in 2015, and his most recent book is Dwelling, Heidegger, Archaeology, Mortality, published with Routledge in 2018. It is he's also published a collection of papers on topics related to existential philosophy in Scotland and France, such as, for example, Duns Scotus's concept of the University of Being, another look in the Warwick Journal of Philosophy, and the return of the relative Hamilton-Bergson, Merleau-Ponty, and French phenomenology. So today he's going to talk about the links between Heidegger and Kenneth White.
Kenneth White, Dwelling, Nomadism, a Geopoetic Education for the 21st Century is what I will attempt to start to think about and start to introduce today. Peppering as I go quotes from various writers, not least yourself, as I go along. Okay, so here we go. In The Wanderer and His Charts, Kenneth White offers 2 crucial texts that serve at once to educate and to initiate his readers into a project a lifetime in the making. In one of these texts, he introduces us to the nomadic intellect, while in the other, he provides an outline of geopoetics. The term geopoetics, which is not to be confused with geopolitics, started to enter into White's texts and talks at the end of the 1970s, after a long period of what he describes as intellectual nomadism. He adopted this term in order to articulate not only a field that was opening up in his own intellectual trajectory, but also to outline a potential general space that would be concerned with the cultivation of a live and life-enhancing world by self-developing individuals. Nomadic, geopoetic, as educator, a creator of groups, in the recognition that while education has never been so ubiquitous, it is nevertheless somehow lacking. These groups have attempted to create new organisations with new thematics and new perspectives, outside the university, that are truly universal in aspiration. The International Institute of Geopoetics, the most recent of these groups, was founded 19 years ago, 1989, and has sites located as far apart as New Caledonia, Chile, Scotland and Sweden. Opening its doors to established academics and artists, and also to those with no formal qualifications or artistic status, but to nevertheless share in its concerns. The Institute of Geopoetics operates in terms that may be expressed well with reference to Jacques Rancière's exploration of the axiom of Joseph Yatoko in The Ignorant Schoolmaster, namely that the same intelligence is at work in all the productions of the human mind. The equality of intelligence that would ground White's active culture is qualitative, not numerical in Rancière's sense. It is an intelligence of the human mind capable of speaking with one another, that is capable of understanding one another, and that is capable of reasoning with one another. It is an equality of intelligence committed to the view that we are, each one of us, eminently capable of creating meaningful lives together in our interactions with one another, in our intellectual and existential endeavours. White has faith that we are capable of rising to the tasks that life puts before us, but it is a faith tempered with an acknowledgement of the difficulties associated with the necessity of creating a real live field and of integrating that field into existence and culture. Each one of us has the capacity to create a life together that is meaningful, and we can do so in such a way that we open ourselves up towards a life that has its being in movement, a life that gestures towards the possibility of becoming a nomadic subject. And all of this will take in a variety of forms of resistance, research and regrounding. It will take in varieties of strategic thinking, policy shifting and openly moving. A tall order, as White says, but perhaps it can be done. The axiom that I invoked above of Joseph Yacoto, a 19th century exiled French lecturer, caused something of a scandal in Holland and France. Yacoto was, who had an aspect of the Scot abroad about him, that is, something heretical, suggested that uneducated people could learn on their own, without the teacher explaining things to them, and that teachers could teach what they themselves were ignorant of. That is, so-called uneducated people could be self-developing individuals. Without any blemish, Yakoto found himself in Holland teaching his students his own native language, who did not speak French, by means of a recently published bilingual edition of Fenelon's Telemaque. Through an interpreter, Yakoto told the students to read half of the book with the aid of translation, to constantly repeat what they had learned, to read the other half quickly, and to write in French what they had thought of it. In the end, the surprised Yakoto was confronted by a fact. His students had learned enough French without the help of explication to express themselves in this new language. Yakoto had educated them without teaching them anything. Yakoto, like White's International Institute of Geopoetics in its educational egalitarianism, had established only the minimal condition that those who attended his lessons, the minimal condition with those who had attended his lessons, namely, of finding something in common with them, which in his case was the novel Telemaque, but it could have been any book, and which in White's and the Institute's case, is the awareness of a problem and the desire to see the opening of a general new field of thought and inquiry of life. In the case of Yakoto, a relationship between the intelligences of Fenelon, his translator, and the students had been established, a relationship without an essential reference to the master educator, to Yakoto himself. The immanent relationship between author, translator, and reader bypasses the mediating intelligence of the master, who might, after all, really be in minority to the doorkeeper, and who delivers what White calls mere instruction. The principle of explication, of pedagogical stultification, has been bypassed in the case of Yakoto and Kenneth White. The intelligences at work, whether in translation or reading, whether in a group, or when thinking or wandering alone, are of the same nature. There is no transcendent master or understanding beyond or behind the page, above or beyond the group, beyond or behind this world. No false bottom that necessitates the work of an other intelligence. An other ground, yes, but not another intelligence. Education, intellectual emancipation, is an imminent affair, and the nomadic subject, duly emancipated, is an intention, a trajectory, a field of energy. The demands of radical equality captured in the proposition that everyone is of equal intelligence is that the thoughts and manners of expression, the voices, actions, and words of the dominated, who are produced by hierarchical social orders structured on a divisive logic that separates worker from thinker, man from woman, adult from child, and so on, be heard in the work of equality as radical communication. Such structures, while real, have no existence out of their affirmation, and radical communication afford the dominated and excluded their just status as people who make sense, as people who are valid partners in dialogue. It is the motorway of Western civilization that has produced these hierarchical social orders, of which school and university are but two examples. And the promise of White's educational vision is that his self-developing individuals be able to participate in something new. The demand of radical equality is made on behalf of the child or student, of any dominated group or individual, and is enshrined in the conviction that such groups do not require instruction in thinking and speaking. In White, who left his post as lecturer at the University of Glasgow for France in the mid-1960s, and who left his position as lecturer there because of his lost his position rather as lecturer there because of his participation in the events of 50 years ago to the month, the events of May '68, following which he would remain unemployed for 2 years. We have a figure that might reformulate Rancière's conviction as a new Pelagianism, a new being of the sea, committed to the view that human nature is a good enough basis for thinking and speaking, so long as you work at it, so long as you cultivate yourself. Importantly, White's educational move is not to wholly abandon the modern university, but it is to profoundly challenge it. He says, the ethos of a truly creative university will be one of self-realisation, based on the notion of auxesis, the increase of life. Education should be rethought as an imminent process of leading out and of opening up paths of growth and discovery that have no predetermined outcomes and or endpoints. Learners should attend to things. They should do field work in White's terms. They should go out into the world, into the countryside and onto the shores. They should become exposed to such places without attempting to build static bodies of knowledge about them. Keep moving. Dwell in the midst of things. Study with others and reconceive education as the discipline with the power to transform the world. As White says, every territory is open if one knows how to read it. Learn to read. The two texts that I invoked at the beginning of this paper are profoundly connected, and connected in multiple ways. One of these connections is in their shared engagement with the thinking of Friedrich Nietzsche, who was a lookout of the inhuman, and who, outside all norms and conventions and categories, was 6,000 feet above humanity in the age. To Nietzsche's counsel, brothers, remain true to the earth, White will add Rimbaud's declaration, if I have taste for anything at all, it is for earth and stones. Taste left for anything at all, it is for earth and stones. It was Nietzsche who created the concept of the philosopher-artist, the figure that becomes the poet-thinker in White's hands, and who is a figure immersed in the field of their immediate experience, engaged in the task of articulating the sound of the universal symphony. The philosopher-artist can be a solitary traveller, an intellectual nomad, a wayfarer who has opened out onto something non-human by virtue of that very nomadism, and who moves out beyond the history of Western metaphysics into a new intellectual existential geography. The White poetics, in a sense yet to be explored here, that Kenneth White entered into, as Craig has identified, brings him into the nomadic tradition of thinkers in Europe who has sought to reconceptualise the relationship of modern thought to the past of Western culture. Thinkers such as Foucault, Deleuze and Derrida in France, who stand within a field of concerns that can be traced to the influence of Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger, and through Heidegger to the Nietzsche by whom White was obsessed in his early years as a student in Glasgow. Wayfarers are continually on the move because they are their movement. Travelling is a way of being. What Bergson suggests of philosophy, that it should be a schooling in the art of living that goes on out of the school in order to connect more to life, White will explore nomadically in terms of geopoetics. Geopoetics becomes an education, a schooling in the movement of life that takes place outside in the world. Intellectual nomads expound a moving poetics that articulates, in Bergson's words, the mobility of which the stability of life is made. Such poetics has weight, force and movement. It resonates. It is what White has called an Atlantic poetics. The consequence of such an educational transformation, which is equally the case for both White and Bergson, is that philosophical speculation and perception will become enriched and enlarged, and as a result everyday life will be nourished and illuminated. If the task of education is to become a master in the art of living, as Bergson would have it, then the complementary task of geopoetics is to move into presence in the world. It is to experience a field and a territory. It is to learn to read and to express with an openness of style a relationship of configural complicity with the cosmological poetics of the universe. Geopoetics is, as White says, Novalis is speaking of a writing of the earth that can be found of birds' wings on shells and clouds, in snow, on mountainsides, in plants, in animals, in the lights of the sky, and which can be integrated into the language of human being. It is McDermott's, and I quote, decrying out on this stony limits, from the heights of a raised beach, a field few in the English language context had any notion of, and into which he often cogently and beautifully enters. All is lithogenesis. All the stones are in this high satiety. As White's intellectual friend and former student Norman Bissell has suggested, one way to approach White is as a poet-teacher who endeavoured to retain the freedom to come and go. White's whole educational approach inspired in Bissell a tremendous feeling of well-being, and there could be no better time for us to read him for the sake of our education. As a poet-teacher, White is to be placed somewhere in the long cultural line of the Scoto-Celtic monks and later medieval and Renaissance wandering Scottish scholars, the Scotus Vegans, who left Scotland for Europe, but who nevertheless took a great deal of Scotland with them, and who can be considered examples of the nomadic intellect, an intellect that, as Cairns Craig has reconstructed it in his very recent The Wealth of the Nation, refuses to be incorporated into the fixed structures of an existing society, and that, to quote White, always seeks to maintain some dynamic that transcends history. Indeed, the nomadic intellect keeps open an alternative space that counteracts history. White's nomadic intellectuals are, we might say, untimely in the Nietzsche-Deleuzian sense of being able to create new lines of flight along which things happen and changes take place. Their untimely or heretical power is their power to disrupt not only their own time but also ours. Such intellectuals are, of course, located within a context, but their untimely power is to gesture toward a new time and a new epoch. Ultimately, heretics, nomadic subjects, provoke cultural learning. They are its catalyst. In fact, the nomadic voice enters in and out of hearing in line with the crises of civilization. White says, "The figure I call the intellectual nomad is the bearer of at least the beginnings of new language and new space. He has broken his way out of the labyrinth and moves in what may at first seem a void, but which is perhaps the high energy field in which could emerge a new world. Pelagius, Erigena, Michael Scott, Duns Scotus, indeed the entire Pelagian line, figures whose thought bordered in one way or another on the disruptive untimely power of the heretical, might speak again in the service of a post-colonial Scotland that would emerge from Alba, or a Scotland uncurried, an original landscape mindscape requiring connection in a wordscape. Alba is an archaic ground, a past in the present, a support for a renewed creativity that draws inspiration from the landscape and that would engender a new geography, a new earth writing, that is at once a cultural archaeology, unearthing the forces of creativity, that links seemingly discrete environments, the Siberian shamanic and Japanese Zen, for example, and an exploration of actual territories that have, as White has put it, resisted the autobahn of Western civilization. Transcendence is, for White, best conducted, as Craig has put it, at the margins of the defined territory of the nation. From such an originary ground, or plateau, as Alba, can take place the ultimate union of matter and space, where local and universal are, as Alfred North Whitehead might say, related as part to whole. Poetry should transcend individual consciousness and reach out into a growing cosmos, a literal universe, a beautiful whole in movement. When it comes to the Scottish mind, White suggests it is the trace of the Bible in its 1611 version, which is perhaps marked at most over the course of the last 4 centuries. In fact, the Bible can, when approached from the perspective of a certain joyful science, provide a good introduction to nomadism, especially in its Old Testament, which is, after all, a book of beginnings based largely on a dialectic of nomadism and sedentarization. Sedentary and nomadic, Cain and Abel. Wayfarers have to sustain themselves as they proceed. Abel, the nomad, whose name, White reminds us, means something like the useless wind, moved out through the wilderness from well to well. The well-being of the pastoral nomad depends upon this network of wells, a network that composes their territory. Cain, the sedentary, builds the first town and names it after his son, Tubal-Cain. It is with Cain that the human being becomes the townsman, a citizen, a maker of history, a constructor of enclosed culture. But it is Abel that Yahweh prefers. Nomadism is the more radical of these two tendencies, precisely because it opens the human out onto the non-human. It is not hard to hear in these two tendencies an echo of the forces identified by Nietzsche in his early work, The Birth of Tragedy, the Dionysian and the Apollonian, that when combined in ancient Greece produced tragedy. In this early work, which was very shortly after his brief service as a medic in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, but was not published until 1872, the Dionysian force is associated with intoxication and ecstasy, literally being outside of oneself. It is associated with lyric poetry and music and embodies the Schopenhauerian metaphysics of a dynamic will underlying appearances and the cultural products such as epic poetry, architecture and sculpture associated with the force of the Apollonian. In the Apollonian, the beautiful arts are accompanied by a cheerfulness that embody the Schopenhauerian metaphysics of individuation. But the Apollonian is not deluded. It is aware of the illusory nature of these individuated forms and is later conceptualized by Nietzsche as a calm moment of stillness within the dynamics of the Dionysian. The Schopenhauerian Dionysian derives to leave Apollonian individuated appearances behind and ecstatically sink back into the original oneness of the will. With this in mind, we can get a glimpse of what White might mean when describing real poetry. Poetry that will reach out into an experience of the earth, as an experience of its incandescence, its whiteness. Poetry signifies the transcendence of the individual conscience and the introduction to a world, a cosmos, a beautiful whole in movement. In a world in absence of poetic transcendence, the penetration, the observations of larval subjects, observations and impressions of this or that, provide a hideous caricature of the real world of poetry. And the house of being, language in Heidegger's words, is turned into a villa or an asylum at the side of the technological highway. Beyond the goddess, there is the world. The rational animal must re-become the animal poeticum, in harmony with the logos, not a victim of its degraded environment, but an inhabitant of its world. Cain's wandering was wandering as punishment. White's was a wandering of necessity born of habit. In A Shaman Dancing on a Glacier, White tells us of his experience in the very late 1950s of finding Mircea Eliade's book Shamanism, the Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, when he was wandering around the streets and back streets of Paris. His explorations of his inner reality at this time induced in him many flashbacks to his childhood on the west coast of Scotland, where, when he was about 11 or 12 years old, he became much concerned with a territory he called Up the Back. In his reading of Eliade, White realised that what he had been up to up the back amounted to a kind of homemade shamanism, an immemorial tradition going back to Paleolithic times, the entry into which for the child shouldn't be so surprising, since, as White says, given enough scope, enough freedom, a child will go through all the past phases of humanity, from fishes to philosophers. The shaman is a dawn man, as the Ojibwa of North America call him, who seeks an ecstasy, a getting outside of oneself and of history, a deconditioning. Through this ecstatic experience, this transcendence, a transcendence within immanence, the shaman attains the capacity to experience and express total life. Through this, the shaman comes to know an identity larger than the socially coded one, and by virtue of this, he is enabled to do the greatest good for the community by giving it breathing space. The total experience of the earth is a luminous experience, Urarian and telluric, which may be expressed by deities, but can also be detheologized and reduced to white light. Beyond the goddess, there is the world. And it is not so surprising at all that flashbacks of a shamanic childhood occurred in the 20-something Kenneth White. As Parmenides said, "It is all one to me where I begin, for I shall come back there." Heraclitus agreed. In the circumference of a circle, the beginning and the end are common. The child, as Giuseppe Ferraro has said, is closer to the beginning of life. They are where the world begins. And through these experiences, White was able to find a poetic language for a certain kind of presency, for giving voice to the unfamiliar, for going back before Socrates in order to begin again. Returning to the two works by White that I invoked at the start of this paper, and to begin to draw things to a close, both works are connected by an engagement with the medieval Scottish philosopher and theologian John Duns Scotus, and with the 20th century German philosopher Martin Heidegger. Scotus, whose epitaph reads, "Scotland bore me, England received me, France taught me, Cologne and Germany holds me," appears as an intellectual nomad in his metaphysics, when he takes a line contrary to the doctrine of analogy of being that was particularly associated with St Thomas Aquinas in his day. Scotus argues for the universality of the concept of being, a concept of being predicable of everything that is, whether that thing be finite or infinite, just as it is, insofar as it opposes nothingness. Hugh McDermid, when speaking from a raised beach, will, as intimated above, invoke Scotus's concept of haesetas, or thisness, of singularity, a radical singular that appears in anything and everything, in a stone on a beach, in the singular intense whiteness of some white thing, in the individuation that is you. To quote White, Scotus is a wanderer at the limits who opens up an unedited space of thought. Scotus was a key influence on the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins, who said of him that he was, of reality, the rarest veined unraveller, a not rivaled insight, be rival Italy or Greece, who fired France for Mary without spot. Hopkins, by sheer coincidence, died in the year 1889, the year in which that other crucial reader of Scotus, Martin Heidegger, was born. Heidegger wrote his postdoctoral teaching qualification on Scotus, and it is there that he says of him that his striking individuality as a thinker characterises him in general as having unmistakably modern traits. He has a more extensive and accurate nearness, or haesetas, to real life, to its manifoldness and possible tensions, than the scholastics before him. He knows how to turn from the fullness of life to the abstract world of mathematics. Scotus is a key figure in the advent of a new way of thinking and being, a way of thinking and being that White will call geopoetics. Geopoetics for White, as I have been suggesting, stands for nothing less than the attempt to open new cultural spaces all over the world. Spaces of education, spaces of self-cultivation. The intellectual nomad, the geopoetician, passes through the many cultures of the world and integrates aspects of them into a new coherence replete with local colorations. The unity of geopoetics is not continental, it is the unity of the archipelago. Geopoetics aims at nothing less than the experience, expression and thinking out of the connection between world and earth, between the human being and the earth cosmic context. Geopoetics' concern is with the condition of the human being in the universe, with the human being in planet Earth, with what White calls a presence in the world. That experience is a field and a territory, and that with an openness of style tunes into the very poetics of the universe. Heidegger is an affluent to geopoetics, who steps out of philosophy into beginning thinking. For both White and Heidegger, poetry shouldn't be thought of as just words on a page. The poetic takes place in language for Heidegger because language preserves the original nature of poetry, which is the setting into work of truth. For White, the depth dimension of poetry is revealed in that it is the very responsiveness to the world wherein the mind cries out for unity, for a unitive experience, an ecstatic existence expanding to a sense of cosmic unity. Poetry in this sense is extra-linguistic. The poetic is revealed in a sheer experience of the nakedness and loveliness of everything. The poetic is ecstatic in the senses given to that term by Nietzsche, Heidegger and Deleuze, of being outside of oneself, outside of the categorical thinking of traditional metaphysics, precisely because we are opened up beyond the humdrum categories of thought in such an experience. Traditional metaphysical categories sought to bring individuals under a generality. The trajectory of Scotus, Nietzsche, Deleuze, McDermott, Heidegger, White will instead open us up towards things extra-categorial, radical singularity, towards their thisness, their haecietas. Such an experience of the white world, as Craig points out, circumvents the abstracting function of language itself and points to the original approach of the world as meaningful. As Herderlin said, and as Heidegger agrees, poetically man dwells on this earth. The white world is where poetry and metaphysics meet, and a geopoetic education for the 21st century will call for, as Thoreau had it, a larger sense than common sense permits. It will explore a new epistemological landscape, a real field. It will research, resist and reground. It will move. It is a tall order, but perhaps it can be done. Thank you.